Reggie Jackson was on John Heyman and Joel Sherman's podcast, and they were talking about the Snell deal came up. And I want to read you this quote that came out of that conversation because I think it's worth reacting to for several reasons. This is Reggie Jackson, Astros consultant. Quote, being fiscally responsible is what kicked us out of the Snell deal. He signed a 2-year deal for $62 million. That's too much for him. He's been hurt a couple times. He's got an option on his own. Between the 4 or 5 people who make decisions with the Astros, we don't play that game. So I think there's a lot to unpack there from that quote. Let's start with just the Snell comments, especially considering the state of the rotation. Charlie, what's your immediate reaction to, let's just start with the substance of what Reggie Jackson had to say in his evaluation of Blake Snell?
Well, I was fine with not going there for Blake Snell. I mean, the rotation was crying out for help, but I'm wary of guys who start seasons late. They can be more apt to come down injured. Let's not overreact to the fact that Snell 2 starts in with the Giants has not been good. His ex-team, the Rays, mauled him over the weekend. But this is a guy who never, ever goes beyond 6 innings, rarely gets you through 6 innings. He's thrown more than 120 innings once in the last 5 seasons. It happened to be last year. Perfect timing, wins the Cy Young Award as he hits the market. But I could understand the discipline there. But Reggie was wrong in talking about the injuries. Snell's not had any injuries within the last 3 years. And the idea that fiscally responsible, then you turn around and give a closer 5 years, $95 million. Okay, not $31 million, but in total commitment, $95 million as opposed to max $62 on Snell. So I thought there was some inconsistency there. I just find it interesting that Reggie Jackson, and good for him for speaking out and having a role that he's happy to have where he's deemed relevant within the organization. But it's just increasingly clear that Dana Brown does not fully wear the pants that one associates with a general manager wearing those pants in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, and it's just a reminder that this is not how Luno ran the front office back in the day. I think there's a lot less nerds in the room, a lot more older ball players giving their opinions. I think it's funny now they're using the back of the baseball card thing with the braid to be like, well, if you look at the back of his card, he's a notorious slow starter. It's like, oh, great. So now we're using that line to justify why he's not very good. But let's be honest about the Snell thing. The fact that they were even considering it and there were reports about it shocks me. This doesn't feel like a thing that the Astros would have done, to where, he has the player option. So if you take a gamble on him, you sign him, and then if he does have a good year and you win on that gamble, he can just go right back out and be a free agent again and leave your team. So I get why they did that. I remember when the Correa negotiations were going on that the Astros didn't want to have player options. They don't really play that game. So it just cements the fact that this is Jim Crane mostly running this thing, and Dana Brown's kind of doing the day-to-day business. But I think this is Jim Crane is kind of the de facto general manager. And I mean, there's nothing we could do about it. We just have to hope that he keeps learning and gets better at it. And obviously his track record's pretty good.
And specifically to Snell, I would have been happy with the risk. And I presume the Astros actually would have been okay if Snell had taken whatever the Astros offer actually was. Sometimes teams float that, hey, we're in on this guy. Psst, we're trying to get after that guy. So fans, any others who maybe are being critical of how you're going about your business, well, at least they tried. I think they just hoped that Snell's market was really going to crash and maybe they could get him at $22 million. Or $21 million instead of $31 million. But if you'd gotten Snell for $31 million and he was a stud and helped you get back to that 5th World Series of this era, and then he left as a free agent, okay. Right, the concerning risk is, well, what if he comes here and he has a middling year or has injury problems or both? He gives you 128 innings with a 3.80 ERA and it's, I opt in. And then you're on the hook for $31 million in 2025. So it was a sensible business decision for the Astros to make. But again, when you have one person saying one thing, another person saying another, Dana Brown, well, there was no one out there who would be remotely worth compared to our internal options. Jordan Montgomery helped end your season last year and helped the Rangers win the World Series. Now, I'm not saying it was obligatory that the Astros should have offered him the deal that he ultimately took with Arizona. a deal so bad for the player that he fired Scott Boras over it last week. But in the end, it'll be about the results. And if their pitching sorts itself out and his team's back in the playoffs and performs credibly in the postseason, all bygones will be bygones on all this stuff.
Josh, I want you to, Rick, I was going to ask that exact question. I want you to react to what Charlie just brought up again about Dana Brown's comments he made after they missed out on Snell, and they were asking about other potential, free agents that were out there, saying that basically what was out there left on the market was comparable to what their internal options. Considering all the question marks, does that look even more, those comments look even more odd now from Dana Brown? And now that we know that there's a multi-person committee, is there a possibility that maybe that's not even what he feels, that maybe he's carrying water for some other decision makers on the team?
Oh, I mean, that's certainly possible. I mean, but Dana Brown knew what he was getting into when he took this job. He knew Jim Crane. I mean, ever since the scandal, he's been very hands-on, and for good reason. He doesn't want something like that slipping past him again. So that's just part of the deal. Dana Brown's background in scouting, I think, is one of the big reasons he got hired, because the farm system is just one of the worst in baseball, and they're trying to fix that. And the sign stealing, penalties really hurt them, missing out on all those draft picks for a couple of years. So it's an uphill battle. But yeah, I mean, the Michael Lorenzen signing with the Rangers, I think he got 1 year, $4.5 million. I know he hadn't done really anything yet, but he was at least a warm body. But Dana Brown couldn't have known, like, we're going to start the season with Verlander, Fromber, just all these guys down. Hunter Brown's going to come out and not be able to get out of first innings of baseball games. He couldn't have seen all this coming. And I tweeted this out the other day. Because of injuries, Hunter Brown is kind of your number 2 behind Javier right now, which is terrifying, right? But, in reality, Blanco is probably your number 1 and Javier is your number 2. But on paper, the injuries they're dealing with, Hunter Brown is kind of your number 2. They got to get something out of him. I don't think they thought he was going to take a step forward and be a quality pitcher and start building on that career. It just hasn't happened. And for me, I think he's not good at commanding the fastball and hitting spots. He's wild in the strike zone. And even though his stuff is good, these are big league hitters. You leave it over the plate. Umpires aren't going to give you pitches a little off the plate if you're missing the strike zone so often. So he's in a bad spot. He's got to get that fastball under control, because the stuff plays, but you got to be able to hit your spots.
Where does it come in on the spectrum? Plausible, best or good case scenario, and fantasy. Crossing your fingers, running around, gathering up rabbit's feet, 4-leaf clover, and hoping for the best. But the notion is, once you get back the guys you expected to be your top 2 starters, and they join Javier and then Blanco and whoever else on the rosters, 4 or 5, right there. Fingers crossed on Jose Urquidy. He wasn't good last year when he pitched a little bit that he was healthy. And then you're getting Garcia back. Garcia is going to be back after the All-Star break. McCullough is more of a question, but they're probably thinking at least one, so that they have these 7, 8 options along the way to fill out the bingo card, that enough of them will line up to be okay. Now, the way the season's gone initially, all right, they're having to bail more water, needed extra buckets to get that water out of the boat. So as they bide their time, do they have enough buckets, or does enough water flush in there that, the ship is sunk to a point where you're really not going to be able to bob back up to the surface and make your push? They're not close to being at that level yet, in part because the division looks rather weak, and in part because we're just into the second inning of the season this week.
Yeah, I know, getting back to the conversation about the advisors and the circle of trust, or who, however you want to say it. I know Jeff Bagwell on the broadcast ruffled some feathers over the weekend with his comments about not knowing what ex-Woba was as a stat. People seem to be outraged, going like, this is a guy who's advising Jim Crane. I think it was probably tongue in cheek more than anything. I think he's kind of a troll when it comes to the analytics audience and the baseball nerd crowd. And again, I also think too, you have different types of advisors. So perhaps, I don't think you're going to lean on him for statistical analysis. They have other people in-house that could do that. But I do think a lot of the his attitude towards that was in just analytics and leaning too hard in one direction in general was probably what that statement was indicative of, and not necessarily an absence of knowledge on that as well.
Well, I didn't see it, so you can't pick up the nuance sometimes if you just see or hear of the quotes. But I'm guessing he was not being tongue-in-cheek on that, and Bagwell doesn't know which stat was it.
Ex-Woba.
And you know what? That's okay.
Yeah.
Because you have different people with different strengths and different perspectives and viewpoints. And I wouldn't hold it at all against Jeff Bagwell. BABIP, I guess, is generally well known now in baseball circles that, okay, you should have an idea what that is. But, FIP, there's so alphabet soup of analytics. So that doesn't bother me in Bagwell's case, because Jeff Luhnow, as the master architect of this era of Astros baseball, he didn't unilaterally make every decision. He didn't scout every player. You're always counting on the counsel of others and people who deal with specific statistical breakdowns. The video on pitchers who are more likely to come up injured, and then even a little bit of the old scouts eyeball test. So it's the I don't know if a president is only as good as his cabinet, but who's in the cabinet and what's the quality of the group there? Or is it just crony golf buddies who it's fun to hang around with and have as your friends? I think some of that has crept into the Astros front office a little bit. Is it going to take them down and render this era shorter than it might otherwise have been? Keep listening.
Yeah, and you mentioned Luhnow. Luhnow made mistakes. His resume is not without its own pot marks too. I mean, again, when you build up a juggernaut the way he has, people tend to overlook that because it's the overall average of hits that he had, and also to your point, he had people that were advising him that he trusted into. But Verlander's not an Astro without Jim Crane pushing for it, as if you believe the reports. Same with Zach Greinke. And for perspective, listen to Yankees fans and how jealous that they are to the fact that Reggie Jackson is a part of the Astros front office and the Yankees wanted nothing to do with him. They look the other way on it. We look at it as a man, here's another older aging player who is giving old school perspective on it. The Yankees actually would welcome that. Again, I don't know. We don't know to what level and what influence Reggie Jackson has, but it would be the equivalent of us watching the Yankees have a dynastic run with Craig Biggio advising in the front office.
Well, they got Office.
Yeah. So anyway, I just think it's funny. The quote's interesting, and I don't know if we're reading too much into it, but I just wanted to get your perspective on that. That's going to be it for this episode of Stone Cold Stros. If you listen on podcasts and you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating. Charlie, Josh, and I will catch you next week, but you don't have to wait that long to get your Houston Sports Fix. All you have to do is subscribe to Sports Map Houston on YouTube and Sports Map Texans as well. We'll have some bonus content during the week for you there. And until next time, go Stros.